John clasped his spoon in his long, spindly fingers and took another bite of the sweet, delicious stewed meat. It was soft and rich, and eating it put his mind at ease. He'd been tormented by memories these past few years, as he'd faced horrors no man should ever know. In his dreams, he could still feel the biting cold of the pass. He could feel the soft powder underfoot, the wind on his face, and he could see Blake's face, blue from exposure, dead eyes staring. John was the first to state the obvious. They were trapped nearly 13,000 feet up the mountain, penned into the pass by an avalanche, and they'd run out of provisions days ago. They'd had to do whatever it took to survive. John took another bite of his stew and moaned in pleasure as his aching gut finally quelled. He'd become emaciated since the accident. His sunken tummy never seemed to fill up no matter what he ate. Not that he ate much lately anyway. Food just didn't taste the same lately. Everything tasted bland, and even when he overate, he never felt full. He'd assumed it must be psychological, some strange manifestation of PTSD from the incident, but that still didn't explain why he couldn't get back to his normal weight. His sister Laura had been sympathetic to his trauma and let him stay with her and her husband. He felt immensely ashamed that he had to rely so heavily on her, and coupled with his frustration at his inability to recover, it only served to compound his depression. He couldn't function during the day for his crippling anxiety, and he couldn't sleep at night for the faces of the dead that screamed at him from behind his eyelids. He put the bowl to his lips and drained the remainder of the stew, then stood up. He stumbled, knocking his chair to the floor, as he realized he had gained several inches in height since sitting down. As the pleasure of the meal faded, the memories came back in a flood. He and Bobby had been the only two of the 5 to return from that mountain. Months later, unable to cope with what they'd become, Bobby took his own life. He hunched over and descended the stairs to the basement. What remained of his brother-in-law lay wrapped in a tarp on the work table. His former euphoria faded into revulsion. He'd lost control again. This time he'd gone too far. His own family! His shame faded into pain, and he crumpled to his knees, screaming and clutching his head with his hands. He could feel bone, covered in velvet, pushing through his skull. He felt his face changing, growing longer, as his scream became more bestial. Then the craving was back. As he rose to his feet once more, looking down on the remains of his brother-in-law, he could hear a door close upstairs. "I'm home," Laura's voice called out. The deer-faced creature that was once John turned its head.